If you think about what happened after the 9/11 attacks, when the US went into Afghanistan to hunt Osama bin Laden and overthrow the Taliban, they had a very small number of people on the ground. I think when Kabul was liberated, it wasn't more than a couple of hundred across the whole country. And of course, what they were doing was using Afghan armed fighters who were anti-Taliban groups. So potentially that could be a model. But I have to say, I think there will be alarm in Trump's MAGA base if he even starts to put those numbers of soldiers into Iran, to organize the Kurds, the Baluchis, the Azeris, other groups where there are ethnic separatist movements, a lot of which they're already armed and they're already capable of action, but they could be beefed up because that would be getting drawn in.
War is now into its sixth day. In a moment, we'll ask the Sunday Times' Mark Urban how it's going and what could happen next. But first, despite the almost total internet blackout, we have been able to make contact once again with an Iranian woman we're calling Rosita. Last month, she told us about taking part in demonstrations against the regime and the brutal crackdown that followed. Rosita has sent us a voice note. She managed to get this through and to us about what is happening in the capital now.
We are all fine. No normal civilian is hurt. The attacks are very accurate. We don't have fear from the missile attacks or whatever. We just have the fear of the undercover people and IRGC all fully armed in the streets because every now and then you see a bunch of people with no formal dress or clothing who have guns, Kalashnikovs, whatever, and they can shoot you if they feel they want to. So that is our most biggest fear, and we are all happy that Khamenei is dead. This is a very, very great thing, and we have a very strange feeling of happiness, hope, and sadness, because he could be dead before and our lives would be spared. But what we are thankful to Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu and all the guys who are fighting for us.
There we go. Rosita also told us that what she wanted to happen now. She still backs the son of the late Shah.
I want Iran, a whole country as it was before. And I believe in Mr. Reza Pahlavi as a leader, as a king. And all my family, all my friends, we think the same now. We have been thinking in different ways before, but nowadays we are united about this matter, and we believe that us Kurds, others Turks, I have a family who are Turks, we don't want Iran to be teared apart, so it wouldn't happen. We won't let it. We are all together in this. We are supporting USA, we are supporting Israel to fight with this regime, and they're supporting us. This regime is crazy. This regime is made from madness. You can see that they have attacked all the countries around them, and you have to stand together and end this regime.
Well, that was Rosita, which is not her real name, speaking to us from Tehran. She sent us those voice notes. I think really stark there. She was talking about plainclothes people in the streets. Let's speak to Mark Urban, the Sunday Times columnist. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate.
I mean, Rosita clearly wants regime change. We can come on to who she's talking about could potentially lead that. How likely, though, do you think it is that her hopes will be fulfilled?
Gosh, yes. And she did use that word hope, didn't she? I think it's so hard to say at the moment. In terms of broadly where we're at now in this, the military strikes are ongoing and I think have started to have an effect. And we can see that in the declining numbers of missiles and drones being launched at neighboring countries by Iran. In other words, they do seem to be suppressing by destroying the launchers and causing difficulties to the people operating them. But we've also seen it going much more widely, pretty much straight away from the Iranian side, retaliating by firing at the Gulf states. Now, the effect of that, of course, is to cause this big spike in the oil price, which I'm sure you've talked about on the show, which will lead to economic hardship, inflation, all the rest of it in other countries, and of course, great economic and indeed ecological damage to those Gulf states. So the pressures that will be there to try and bring this to a halt. And the US has already defined its aims in terms of stopping Iran from being able to present a military threat to its neighbors, which implies a campaign in which they will destroy Iranian missiles, missile factories, the nuclear industry, the warships, that kind of thing. And then I think reach a point where they've ticked enough of those boxes and they will say, job done. The Israelis won't be quite so happy about that, but they'll just have to go along with it if Trump ends the war. And then that question, coming back by a circular route to the question you asked about, well, yes, but if the regime is still there and they're not willing to stop the war, they keep firing drones across the Gulf or carrying out various other acts, not to mention their internal repression, what happens then? And I think that's a very unclear picture. That potentially forces the US to engage again with Iran diplomatically and do deals. President Trump always talks about his love of a deal. And would that deal end up strengthening the regime in Iran by offering some limited sanctions relief? So all of these things are potentially on the horizon, with an ending that could be very disappointing to someone like Rosita.
Yeah, and I think that's the big concern now, isn't it? I mean, we heard earlier, we were talking about the potential for the Kurds to be armed as part of this conflict, and conflicting reports overnight that had already happened. I mean, part of this it may well be a sort of propaganda war, a part of trying to diminish Iran's potential here. But do you really think, I mean, Donald Trump has talked about boots on the ground. Do you really think that could happen here? Do you think that would change things inside Iran if it did happen?
Well, there are various precedents and models, call them what you will, for what you might call regime change light. If you think about what happened after the 9/11 attacks, when the US went into Afghanistan to hunt Osama bin Laden and overthrow the Taliban, they had a very small number of people on the ground. I think when Kabul was liberated, it wasn't more than a couple of hundred across the whole country. And of course, what they were doing was using Afghan armed fighters who were anti-Taliban groups. So potentially that could be a model. But I have to say, I think there will be alarm in Trump's MAGA base if he even starts to put those numbers of soldiers into Iran, to organize the Kurds, the Baluchis, the Azeris, other groups where there are ethnic separatist movements, a lot of which they're already armed and they're already capable of action, but they could be beefed up because that would be getting drawn in. And of course, we've already seen several Americans have been killed. There'd be casualties. There might well be people captured and exploited by the regime for propaganda uses. So, it's a whole other world of complexity and jeopardy, I think, for Trump if he starts to put troops on the ground.
And how much power does Donald Trump have here, Mark? That might sound like a strange question given the context of the last couple of days. But from what we hear and what we understand about the genesis of this particular intervention, and also some of the stuff about arming the Kurds, for example, a lot of it is coming from Benjamin Netanyahu, who our correspondent this morning told us would like this war to continue for months to diminish Iran's stockpiles of weapons, rather. Is Donald Trump really sort of leading this? Is he being led by Benjamin Netanyahu? And how willing is America to commit for that amount of time?
Well, this is a very active subject of discussion in the US, particularly in MAGA circles, where there's a pretty sharp division now between those who've become very anti-Israeli as a result of the last couple of years of war, and those who think they're very much in it together. Trump appears to be siding with the latter faction, and of course he has been saying, claiming ownership, if you like, of this war and saying it was his idea. I think I think the hair really was let loose by Marco Rubio a couple of days ago when he said in Congress that the US assessed that Israel was about to strike on its own, and that would have brought retaliation against American bases, etc. So they decided they had to go in as well. I think that was the moment where this idea that Israel triggered this whole thing really gained quite a bit of momentum. I think Rubio was trying to make an argument in terms of imminence of threat, which is a legalistic thing to try and justify what the US has done. I mean, we don't really know, to be honest, to what extent Netanyahu was the key factor in convincing Trump. I mean, Trump will always, of course, try and portray things as his own idea and himself as the boss. One thing I do think is clear, and we saw this when Trump put pressure on Netanyahu to go for the Gaza ceasefire, the one that is still going on more or less, is that I think if Trump decides enough is enough, he will simply stop it and tell Netanyahu to do the same. So whatever Netanyahu might want in terms of a lengthy war, I think is going to be the reality. The other thing to say about Israel and what it would aim to achieve militarily and politically here is some of the briefing to the Israeli press talks about another 2 weeks. So it may not be that they can carry on indefinitely with this either.
It's a very good point, Mark. And it's one that we will keep a very close eye on, as I know that you will. Thank you very much for giving us your thoughts this morning.
It's a pleasure.
That is Mark Urban, the Sunday Times columnist, and you can hear more from Mark on Hugo Rifkin's programme every Monday on Times Radio.
Such an interesting commentator, I think, on world affairs. Here's the answer to the Times Radio Daily Quiz question, which we set half an hour ago.
We asked you, serving from 1849 to 1852, Henri de la Meurthe is the only person to have held which political office in French history?
The answer is, and one of you got this right, Vice President of the Republic.
Congratulations to you. And if you like that, there are 15 more questions in the Times Daily Quiz, available now on the app and the website.
So while conflict continues in the Middle East and new accusations of Chinese spying hit Westminster, MPs had a group dancing lesson from Strictly Professionals. How much of a sense of humour should we retain about that subject? We'll answer that question shortly. This is Times Radio Breakfast with Kate McCann and Stig Abell.